Chua, and I'm a slam poet. But I really loved Harley's talk, and interestingly enough, though this wasn't exactly synchronized or planned, I'm going to begin with a travel story of my own too. But it's a bit of a scarier travel story, because in 7th grade, I went on one of the scariest trips of my life. It was a study tour in China for 6 weeks, and it was with a group of batchmates and friends. But what made it scary was it was my first time really away from home, away from family, away from friends. And I'd been on trips before. I'd been to Hong Kong, I'd been to Singapore, but that was always with people I knew. This was new, this was scary, because this was a place where I was unfamiliar, where I was grouped with a lot of acquaintances, and I really wasn't sure what I was doing, in all honesty. And I missed home. It was my first time really away from home. And aren't we all scared of first times? So yeah, I was assigned to a group, and I'll be honest, the group was mostly filled with acquaintances, people I'd never met before. And from the beginning, I started to withdraw from them because I had a hard time finding common ground. I was really scared, too scared to start conversations, to make eye contact, to even say hi, so I kept quiet. Here, let me try to explain that silence. Have you ever gone on a bus stop while commuting and realized that the bus is filled with strangers? That was me. You see, we'd take field trips on a bus and we'd all line up, and our bus was sort of like this. There's a row of 4 seats, and the seats are divided into 2. And I'd walk in, and I wouldn't know the person in front of me or behind me, so I wasn't talking to anyone. And I'd sit on the window seat, and there's this empty seat beside me, and I watch people walk along the aisle of the bus, and I'm crossing my fingers, just hoping someone's gonna sit down and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" But then I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and they walk past me shuffling, and suddenly everyone sat down, and I'm still alone. No one's taken that seat beside me. So I just look outside the window, and what hits me is that silence. Because everyone's talking, everyone's speaking, everyone's having wonderful conversations. I'm really excited for this trip, aren't you? I'm really excited about where we're going, and me, I'm there by the window, and in the midst of that noise, that silence was suffocating. It was deafening, and I couldn't hear myself speak. All my bus rides kind of end up like that. And I remember one day when it was really bad because 4 weeks into this study tour, I hadn't had a single decent conversation with anyone. I was too scared to take off my mask, and I went home. And that was one of the days in the week when my parents would call home. Because back then in that study tour, we'd have an allocated night for when parents would call home, and we'd talk. And that day, I said the biggest lie of my life. They called me up, I picked up the phone, and they asked me, "Ethan, how are you?" And you know what I said? I said, "I'm okay." And that was my lie. That was my silence. I wasn't okay. I'd never been okay, not since the start of that trip, not since that window seat, but I told them I was okay. And you could hear the tears breaking through the words like floodgates finally opening. But I hung up the phone and I didn't explain anything. My roommate had left the room to give me a bit of space to talk with my parents. And I remember hearing him come back in, and I didn't want him to see me crying, so I rushed to the bed. I got the blanket, and I pulled it over my face like a mask. And he thought I was asleep. He never knew anything was wrong. He went into the bathroom, took a bath like normal, then went out to talk with some other friends, and there I was, crying underneath that blanket, really scared, really shocked, really afraid. But I didn't want anyone to see me. That blanket was my mask. But then when you're hurt, when you're that low, when you're that scared, when you're that afraid, that's when things can affect you, right? And it's kind of corny, but there's always this one moment in our lives when a song really speaks to us, right? When you hear this song, you're like, "Oh my God, that's me right there." And I remember my roommate had left the TV on. He'd forgotten to turn off MTV. And suddenly Radiohead came on, and they sang Creep. For those of you unfamiliar with the song, the lyrics go like this: "I'm a creep. I'm a weirdo. What the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here." And I felt that. I took off the blanket, and I listened to Radiohead, and I cried, and it was amazing because for the first time in 4 weeks, I could say what I felt, right? So here's my first slam poem, and it's called "Blankets and Masks," or Creep. This is for suffocating silence, for the blankets you wore like blindfolds to smother your eyes, the quiet your cries, telephone wire symphonies raging within your lungs kept silent. You were sound, kept within, building, raging. Tell me how you feel, cord coiled around your neck, cloth blindfolded. I'm a creep. I'm a weirdo. What the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. And it almost drowned you. You almost drowned silence like volcano ash, like inferno smoke, keeping the air from your lungs. You want to make it out, but all you can do is cough, cough, cough. The racking, the noise, but it's not your noise. It's everyone else's noise. They aren't listening to you. What the hell are you doing here? You don't belong here. This is far away from what you're used to. This is the sound of them and not the sound of you. You've cut and clipped the vocal cords, choking on blankets and misplaced words like awkward silences, unspoken things, volcanic ash. What the hell am I doing here? Silence chokes you like sulfur, like rope. I don't belong here. For that moment, listening to that song, it felt a bit like that. Like I'd been quiet for a long time and silent for a long time, but that was my first chance to break out. But the moment the song stopped and the TV went off and I went back to bed, it was back to the quiet lies. And everyone came back from the trip and everyone said, I had such a great time. And I felt bad because I didn't want to ruin people's moods, right? You know, I didn't want to feel like I'd wasted those 6 weeks as an opportunity. So I told the nice stories. I told the funny stories. I made kwento about the squat toilets and the food. And I had said nothing about how I really felt. But masks we wear have this really strange tendency. Sometimes they fall off when we least expect them to. And I had been wearing this mask of silence for so long, like volcano ash, like fog. And it had been almost 3 years until something arrived to take off that mask and to strip me bare. And that was poetry. And poetry arrived as a bit of luck, a bit of coincidence. And as it so happened, our English teacher for the quarter had to be subbed out because she went on that study tour. Coincidences indeed. And the substitute, Mr. Gala, who's my mentor and my teacher, was going to teach the poetry unit. And up until then, I'd had this perception of poetry as something high art, something really fancy. When I heard poetry, I think of Edgar Allan Poe, of Shakespeare, of Blake, of sonnets, of stuff on the page that was very arty. But that wasn't the poetry Mr. Gala showed us. Mr. Gala showed us slam poets like Sarah Kay and Phil Kay and Taylor Molly and Shane Koisizan. People who went up on that stage and slammed their hearts out like they weren't afraid of anything. And they gave me the knife to cut that rope. They gave me the gas mask to breathe through that fog. They gave me sound. Sound, sound, say it out loud. And when they spoke, it wasn't noise. It wasn't, how's the weather today? Or awkward silence noise. It was real sound. The kind of sound that cuts through masks and barriers. The kind of sound that makes you think, that makes you feel, that makes you love. And they gave me a way out. They made sure poetry jumped from that page I thought it existed on and into the life, into my lips, and out of my heart, out of my lungs. So we had an assessment in that third quarter. And it was to recite a slam poem of our choice, of our own. And that was my chance, you see. For some people, the slam poets were really simple. They'd slam about basketball or their favorite teams or their pretend crushes. But for me, this was my first chance to break that silence that had been suffocating me for so long. So I slammed, and I slammed my heart out. And that was the scariest thing, okay? That was scarier than China. That was scarier than the window seat. That was scarier than the blanket covering my face. The scariest thing was to tell people how I felt because that was the worst part. That was when I could be hurt the most, right? When you tell someone, I love you, that's when they can say no. And that's what I was so scared of. I was afraid people would say no. And if they had said no, I can tell you right now, I'm not sure I would have made it. That would have been my final suffocating silence. But when I performed for the first time, going up to that makeshift stage in that classroom, standing in front of the whiteboard, I wasn't rejected. I was respected and accepted, and people listened to me. For the first time, I was speaking, and it mattered. I said, I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo, and people said, we've been creeps, we've been weirdos, we know how you feel. I told them, I don't belong here, I don't belong here, I don't belong here. And you know what they told me? You do. You do. You do. And this conference, this TED Talk, is about defining our X, right? And for the longest time, my X was silence. My X was suffocation. But in that quarter, in that first burst of slam poetry, my X changed. It became sound. What is sound? Sound is revelation. Sound makes things true because it's easy enough to hide our emotions when we don't tell anyone about them. But the moment we say it out loud, the moment we say, I'm hurt or I love you, it becomes real. Not real in the sense that it wasn't there before, but real in the sense that it was there, but you never looked at it before. You never said it before. And sound is taking off that blanket, that mask, those things we all wear, and stripping yourself bare and saying, I feel, I've been hurt, and I'm not afraid to say it anymore. And each time I recite poetry, each second I spend on the stage, I am making myself vulnerable for all of you, because I trust you. I recite poetry knowing I can be told you don't belong here. And each time, you know what they tell me? No, you do. You do belong here. So I think and I hope that by the end of this talk, poetry won't just matter to me, but to you guys too. Because I don't want you to keep this perception that poetry is about rhyme or meter or syntax or Shakespearean sonnets or frost or verse or imagery. Poetry at its heart is about the truth, and the truth is that we all feel a little bit too much. Poetry is going up to your friend or your crush and saying, I love you, like it's the last day of your life. Poetry is going up to your parents and saying, I've been hurt before. Poetry is telling your friends, you matter and I don't want to lose you. Because why are you hiding? You don't need to hide. We've all been creeps, okay? We've all had that song on replay in our heads. We've all been told you're not loved, and we can all break that noise because that noise isn't real. The real sound cuts through silence like knives through rope. The real sound is, you belong here. You do. So each time I perform, I make it personal, and people will joke that these are all love poems, but they're not the love poems you expect. They're the love poems that are more about saying it out loud, about making things matter, because I have to tell you guys, right? Don't be afraid to say I love you, because that matters. Even though it's cheesy or it's corny, it's also something really important, because the first step to being loved is allowing yourself to be hurt, to be vulnerable. And sound lets you do that. Poetry lets you do that. So you don't need the stage. You don't need to be up here to be a slam poet. All you need to do is to say the truth. Say it out loud. Make it count and make it matter. There's no need to hide anymore, right? And I wore silence for almost 3 years. I wore silence like you'd wear a polo shirt to school. I wore silence like you'd wear khaki pants. I wore silence for so long, but now I've broken the habit. And I'm standing in front of you right now saying, I fought back. I took off the rope. I took off the blindfold. I threw aside the blanket. And I left that bus. I left that window seat. And I stand in front of you brave and proud and vulnerable. And I know I can be hurt. But I'm not scared of that anymore. And I remember the old song, right? I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo. But I fell in love with a new song. And once again, I'm a bit corny, and the song is Yellow by Coldplay. And I think it's the best reply to the soundtrack of my life. So with that, my final slam poem to you all is called Runways and Star Systems, or Yellow. And it's a poem from me to you. And it's a poem that my dorm room self crying in China should have heard all those years ago, and it's a poem that matters. Runways and Star Systems, or Yellow. There's a distance from home that's easy to bridge. It's a distance that can be crossed by airplanes and touched by runways. But the distance here, from me to you, that's tougher. And they haven't built airplanes for that yet. It's the kind of distance we don't talk about, you and I. The kind where it's okay as a blanket we use to hide our tears, because we're both too scared to show them. There's a distance here that can't be mapped in meters or miles, but that can be measured in awkward silences and broken smiles. The smoke and mirrors we use to hide our airplane hearts, they're flying further and further away. And I wish your arms were a runway, my lips a jet plane. Open them. Let me hear what you are saying. And you're telling me you don't belong here? You're telling me you don't matter? Then let me speak. Let me be sound for you. Let me cut in that silence. Let me tell you that you do belong here. You do belong. You do belong. And they haven't built airplanes for us yet, but they've written poems. They've sung love songs. They've told stories, hanging onto words like concrete and mortar to hold your runway arms against my ash propeller eyes, like the lyrics to your favorite song. And you ask me what the hell you're doing here? I have an answer now. And 3 years ago in that dorm in China, I didn't have an answer, but I have an answer now. And the answer is to take off your blindfold and your mask and to look at the stars and how they shine for you. Haven't you heard how the universe works? Haven't you heard that scientists are beginning to give up on atoms and electrons? Scientists are beginning to think that the fundamental particle that makes us is a string, like a guitar string, a vibrating string. Like the D chord is a neutrino, the A chord, the proton, the G chord, an electron. Scientists have discovered the fabric of the universe, and that fabric is sound. That fabric is poetry. So I look at those stars, and I know they're singing for you. They are slam poems, and they are love songs, and they are the strings arranged for your body and your soul to be touched, enveloped by sound, by strings, not by silence. You are music, the same music that the universe is hiding somewhere behind its blanket mask of matter. And I love to listen to you sing. So I'll say it out loud. And say it out loud with me, the soundtrack of our broken hearts. Put them all back together. The runway ash rubbed into our scars like poetry, crossing blood vessel gaps like bridges, like hands held together. I'll sing it back to you. I remember the old chorus. What the hell am I doing here? What the hell am I doing here? What the hell are we doing here? And I have an answer now. Look at the stars. Look how they shine for you. And everything you do, you know, I love you so. You know, I love you so. Thank you.